Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, August 19th, 2019, and today we're going to be looking at the 2020 top Democrats and how much money they are making on a nationwide basis. So the New York Times recently sent out an interactive map that is phenomenal. It shows a number of states and even, counties that are donating to certain candidates and exactly how much money they're making, how many donors they have, based off how many they report, and it's an overall very interesting map. We see the national map on your screen right now with every single state filled in with leaders of donations nationwide. So one thing that is clear, Bernie Sanders is getting the most individual donors. Now, typically, when we're talking about just a couple of individual donors, they may not exactly amount up to major donors nationwide, but Bernie Sanders is leading nationwide in terms of individual donors and most money raised. Now, we're going to look through this map because it does hold a lot of interesting information, and fundraising is a very, very key contributor to who wins in political primaries and caucuses. If you don't have advertisements and things out on the radio, on the TV, etc., you're not going to win an election. You can't just win based off name recognition alone, which proved true. If we saw back in 2016, Hillary Clinton narrowly won the Iowa caucus against someone who was laughed about running, months before, Bernie Sanders. And we're talking about Iowa, which should have been a pretty solid, swing state, but still in favor of Clinton. Obviously, she was the front runner, winning by, I think at the time, 15% nationwide. So there's no real reason as to why it should have gotten close, except it was decided by less than a percentage point, and a lot of indicators went back to fundraising. Sure, Bernie Sanders may have had more individual donors than Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was definitely funded by a lot more powerful people. If we look at the superdelegates and just where her money came from generally, and that makes sense. She's a former first lady. She's been in politics for 25 plus years, so she definitely has a lot more workings than someone. Yes, he was a senator and representative for a very long time, but he wasn't exactly this top name, some first lady for a governor of Arkansas, then first lady in the White House, and then ran for Senate in New York in 2006. Bernie Sanders didn't really have that whole name recognition amongst the Democratic Party that Hillary Clinton had. Comparing it to 2016 definitely does have its plus and minuses. But looking ahead to 2020, this map is insanely good for Bernie Sanders. This is a new updated map from August 2nd showing Bernie Sanders at 746,000 individual donors nationwide. The person in second place is Elizabeth Warren, followed by Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, and then Joe Biden. What's interesting is that Joe Biden is ahead of all those other four candidates. He's ahead of Sanders. Warren is ahead of Sanders as well. So Sanders is pretty much in the third place position at the top of the donor chart. If we're looking at where his donations are coming from, literally everywhere. Almost every single state with the exception of Delaware, Indiana, Minnesota, not Hawaii, sorry, Montana, I don't know how I confuse the two, and Texas, he has had, including Puerto Rico, which is surprising, he has had the most, the most individual donors out of any other candidates in each of those states alone. He pretty much controls the country in terms of fundraising. Now, that doesn't exactly turn and say that he's going to get a lot of a number of voters. There are obviously places where Bernie Sanders may not be as popular, such as the South, and he's getting more donations than someone like Joe Biden, or they may be split between someone like Senator Harris and Vice President Biden. It really just depends. Obviously, Amy Klobuchar is popular in her home state, Minnesota. She's going to get a lot of donations from there. Pete Buttigieg is popular in his home state of Indiana, getting them from around his area, actually. Texas has a lot of donors for Beto O'Rourke. It makes sense. Delaware as well. Steve Bullock, Montana, isn't exactly the biggest state, which means that he's not making a lot of money, but sure, has a majority in the state of Montana. What's interesting is that Senator Kamala Harris has no spots in areas such as California. Elizabeth Warren does have a little bit in Massachusetts, but it isn't doing much for her there. There's another map that we can take a look at where they exclude Bernie Sanders. So the guy who is known for his small contribution and number of donors, and now he's excluded. So we're taking him out of the race. That leaves Warren, Buttigieg, Harris, Biden, and O'Rourke to this New York Times map. Minnesota is completely wiped out of any other candidate, left solidly for Klobuchar. Buttigieg is left solidly in Indiana. O'Rourke solid in Texas, except for that small pocket for Julian Castro. Steve Bullock pretty much solid in all of Montana. And then it pretty much just disperses. We have Jay Inslee in Washington, which makes sense, even though he's polling at 0.0% nationwide on average. But if we're looking around, there's a lot more purple than you'd expect. There's a lot more green. Biden isn't exactly doing too well. Looking at California, Harris territory pretty much. We look at the rest of the country, a split between what we see is a match between Biden and Warren. Now, Buttigieg is actually doing very, very well. If you look at North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, we're just seeing a lot of purple spots, which is a really good sign. The fact that Buttigieg is doing better than Biden in New Hampshire in fundraising or Harris shows a really good sign for him in the upcoming primary, upcoming as in like 6-7 months. But regardless, Biden pretty much has a hold on the South, generally speaking, if we're just looking at where you see the most numbers. But if we're looking in the bigger areas, Buttigieg and Harris and Warren are getting a number of donations from there as well. But Warren pretty much has it set. So it's really weird, though. Sanders and Warren, both sort of more left than Joe Biden, progressive type candidates, typically do better amongst small, I guess, dollar donations and a number of donors. 421,000 for Senator Warren and 746,000 for Senator Harris. Both of them combined would be the ultimate progressive ticket, but I don't think that it's actually going to happen at any point in time, just because of the fact that the Democratic Party will need a centrist Democrat if they want to please those HRC Joe Biden type voters. Now, if we're looking at this map as well, Biden, he's not doing too well. We can scroll down and see another map that shows the candidates who have raised the most money. So generally, donations typically mean you're going to make more money if you have more donations or more donors than the other person. But Elizabeth Warren is in third place in candidates who have raised the most money behind Pete Buttigieg, and Pete Buttigieg is behind Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is at 36 million, and Buttigieg is at 32 million. So Buttigieg is actually coming close to Bernie Sanders' spot. Buttigieg hasn't really necessarily recently, actually compared to Bernie Sanders, I would guess you would say recently has gotten more popular. But if we're talking about just the general trend, Buttigieg has been a pretty consistent candidate nationwide. He peaked at 3%, peaked at third place nationwide, and is now back at fifth place nationwide, but he's second in terms of candidates who have raised the most money. The candidates that need to win now in the earlier areas are people like Pete Buttigieg, though he is a top contender and probably still can remain in the race. If he's getting trampled by people like Sanders and Warren and Harris and Biden at every single early voting state, it doesn't spell out good news for him. The good thing for him is that he's doing pretty well in Iowa and New Hampshire in terms of polling. He obviously has Indiana down as a solid, but generally, Pete Buttigieg is not necessarily polling the best amongst early candidates, which could be pretty interesting. We have another thing that this is actually not as recent. It's from July 16th, 2019. But we have the amount raised from individual contribution in millions. So I think, Pete Buttigieg is ahead at 32.3 million nationwide, and Bernie Sanders, of course, is ahead of him at 36 million. But this is the second quarter, which means that this is more recent than the overall national average. Pete Buttigieg is actually on top, and Joe Biden is in second place. That is something that really surprises me, considering that typically he's established as someone who doesn't really have individual contributions and more has, I guess, corporate donations, things like that, followed by Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and then Senator Harris. So if we're looking at the national average, sure, Bernie Sanders has raised the most money on average. But if we're going back here, it looks like these individual contributions are the only campaign funds that Joe Biden has right now, $22 million. Pete Buttigieg got $24.9 million, but the fact that Joe Biden has done pretty well in individual contributions really surprises me, because I did not expect that from someone who's, pretty much Hillary Clinton light, less than Kirsten Gillibrand, obviously, but very closely tied to the Obama administration and Obama-like tactics, and you wouldn't necessarily expect that, maybe from Obama, but not exactly these candidates that have been in politics for such a long time. But Bernie Sanders at 36 million, still a good sign for him. He still has money to spend. Pete Buttigieg definitely has money to spend. He's going to be very, very good. He's a fundraising star. Warren and Harris, though they are in third and fourth place, Biden is definitely coming for their spots, and we could very well see him replace them there. And as soon as Biden gets that top candidate, most raised in money spot, he's going to dominate the 2020 field. He's already at 30% plus on a nationwide average, and I'm not saying he's unbeatable per se, but it doesn't look too good for a number of other Democrats. I know many of you guys may not support Joe Biden, but he's at a very good position at this point. He's made a number of gaffes which have barely taken down his numbers right after the first debate. He didn't dip as much as expected, and if we're talking about the overall steady increase in his numbers, leading up to the September debate, this man could be at 40% by the time we reach there and could take a knock of 6 to 7% and still lead the rest of the Democrats by 10, 15% on average. If we're scrolling down here, we have major areas talking about Washington, D.C., Boston, New York City, Chicago, Atlanta, Oakland. If we're talking about the states that actually matter, I guess you would focus on areas like Chicago. Sorry, not Chicago. Oh, actually, Chicago outskirts, not exactly that part of Chicago. Atlanta, definitely for the Georgia push, which is surprising. Biden and Harris are doing pretty well, but I would expect them to dominate more out of Atlanta, considering that it's an area that loves Biden and Clinton-type Democrats. Pretty much anyone tied to Obama, to be completely honest with you, but it's surprising that Sanders is doing very well there. But here we have the overall map for all of these candidates. In fact, we have every single candidate that's running. One thing that's interesting is Tim Ryan suspended his campaign, but 2 days after said he would jump back on the campaign trail. I think that's pretty interesting. I don't think that he's going to remain in the race. Suspension usually comes before withdrawing from the race completely. But we'll see what happens with Tim Ryan. I know a lot of you commented that on my last video, but he hasn't officially withdrawn himself from the 2020 Dem-Nom completely yet. But Bernie Sanders, you can see pretty much solid support nationwide, which is a really good sign. Polling numbers can mean one thing, and then donations can mean another thing. Generally, polling numbers are I guess, more accurate in terms of showing your overall support, because yes, people can support you without donating money to you. But if Bernie Sanders is at this many donors nationwide, it's a really bad sign for a number of other Democrats who may be thinking that they could peel off away from his voters. Joe Biden, I think, is the only Democrat at this point that doesn't actually have to worry too much about fundraising, to be completely honest with you. Elizabeth Warren, pretty much solid. Massachusetts, we're looking at some areas. Bernie Sanders definitely has the way more solid map than any of them. Beto O'Rourke, only solid in Texas, pretty much. Pete Buttigieg, same thing in Indiana. You can see right on the East Coast with Joe Biden, which is pretty good for when those states come around. But if we're talking about early voting states, we don't see much actually out of Iowa. We don't see much out of New Hampshire. We do see a little bit out of South Carolina and a little bit out of Nevada, but it's nothing compared to what we see with someone like Bernie Sanders. Iowa, not Virginia, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Carolina may be the only area that Joe Biden may be doing a little bit better in. In fact, actually looking at that national map, it didn't look like it either, but definitely coming down to the big cities couldn't necessarily make or break the race. And again, if we're talking about the most recent fundraising, we're looking at it. Yes, Sanders has the most cash in the bank according to the New York Times, but Joe Biden has outraced him in the second quarter. In fact, that has pretty much funded the entirety of the campaign. But if we're talking about cash on hand in millions, Bernie Sanders, of course, like I said at top, Pete Buttigieg, Warren, Harris, then Biden down to 10.9. But yeah, so we have some other numbers down here. They aren't too important. Talking about several low-tier candidates raised most money from their small donors. William Castro, 74%. You know, that's a really good sign necessarily. Bernie Sanders at 70%. That is also a good sign, considering that means that he is getting a number of donors, in which we saw 746,000. The candidates who raised the most also spent the most. That definitely makes sense. They obviously, many Democrats spend more than they took in. John Delaney at 756%. My last video, I said he was not stupid. He's rich, but not stupid. You know, maybe I may have to take back that statement, because looking at some of these numbers, that is a horrible ratio. He is going to end up spending all of his money. Trump has twice as much cash as the best funded Democrats, but that also makes sense. If we combine all the Democrat numbers, they obviously outraised Donald Trump at large. Donald Trump is the only real Republican that could win running, so that definitely makes sense. But once we gear up into 2020, after Iowa starts, we'll see how the campaign changes from then on. So individual contributions, Pete Buttigieg, this is recent second quarter, by the way, pretty much Pete Buttigieg actually has the most cash on hand, which is pretty interesting. Joe Biden down to 10.9 million. Bernie Sanders has the most cash on hand as of right now. Pete Buttigieg is at 22.7, followed by Warren, then Harris, and then Biden. But if Biden is spending that money, he's definitely spending it on something that's going to help his campaign, because he's already known nationwide. He doesn't need help with that. But if we're talking about where he's going to put his ads, he definitely could see a little bit of a support boost if he's doing things right. So that pretty much wraps up this video. I'm definitely going to cover this a lot more often. These maps are very, very interesting, and as the race goes on, we could see support drop for a number of candidates in certain states. But yeah, so finishing this video, I'm just going to discuss, I have a 2020 Senate election night upcoming, actually full election night, President, Senate, and Governor, that was decided completely by you guys. It probably will be out around early September, just because I am currently out of the country, and the Wi-Fi here is absolutely horrible. So it's going to be really hard for me to make an election night, and making PNGs on an online software that'll take 5 minutes to load one picture when I need to do 60 plus candidates. So I'm going to have to deal with that as soon as I get back, so I'll jump right on that. But yeah, so hopefully we'll expect that one pretty soon. So that pretty much wraps up this video. So thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.